At 8 in the morning, a stranger placed a white envelope on my doormat like it might bite. He didn't linger, just tipped his cap, said, "You've been served," and walked back to a car that didn't belong to my street. I stood there in my robe, coffee cooling in my left hand. The print on the front was thick, official, indifferent. It knew me, but it didn't love me. I've lived long enough to recognize the moments that split a life into before and after. They never arrive with thunder, only with paperwork. I told myself it was a mistake, a neighbor's mix-up an address off by one digit. But the letter spelled my whole name, steady as a verdict. Inside, something waited, accusations shaped like courtesy, boundaries punctuated like laws. I didn't open it right away. I watched the steam fade from my cup and felt the porch boards cool beneath my feet, and then I finally broke the seal. 72 isn't fragile, it's practiced. I've taught classrooms full of 7th graders, buried a good man, balanced checkbooks in the dark when the power bill didn't care about paydays. I have a way of doing things steady, quiet, right the first time, if I can help it. So reading my name in a complaint felt like seeing it carved on a park bench by a stranger's knife. Defendant, as if I'd trespassed with malice when all I've ever done is let myself in with casseroles and a spare key nobody said to return. My hands didn't shake, but something inside me did a small hinge that holds a life on its frame. I kept waiting for the phone to ring with the words, "It's a misunderstanding." It didn't. The kettle clicked off. The house settled. Across the street, sprinklers stuttered to life like applause for someone else's morning. I placed the papers on the table I bought secondhand, the year my son started kindergarten. And for the first time since then, I wondered if doing right was a language no one spoke anymore. When I sold the old place, I told myself I was choosing joy. The chipped sink, the walnut tree that dropped gifts on the roof all autumn, the porch where I stitched Halloween capes, it had been a good house. But 5 minutes from my son's new life sounded better than memories I dusted alone on Saturdays. The townhouse I found was modest and bright. A kitchen that asked for 2 pots at once, a little patch of soil for basil and stubborn daisies. "I'll be useful, not underfoot," I promised the mirror while taping labeled boxes. Books, Christmas, grandkids things. I pictured Tuesdays that needed a sitter, and Wednesdays with spilled spaghetti and bedtime stories attempted in whispers while parents grabbed a rare breath outdoors. I pictured being the kind of nearby that softens the edges of hard weeks' grocery runs. A ride to the pediatrician's soup when colds come like dominoes. I did not picture a future where my footsteps would be measured. My kindness itemized, my presence tallied like a fee. Boundaries arrived like drizzle, polite, reasonable, a vocabulary word from someone else's podcast. "Could you text before you swing by?" Of course. Maybe we keep treats to once a week. We're trying to cut sugar. Easy. Then the drizzle turned weather. "Please don't reorganize anything. It makes us feel watched." I nodded, hands in my lap. After that it was, "We need Sundays to ourselves. We're moving towards screen-free nights. We're not doing Santa this year. It's a values thing." None of it was monstrous. It was tidy, efficient, and yet the tone cooled by degree until breath fogged between us. I learned a new choreography at their door. Wait for a text, backstand on the mat, hold the bag low, smile without opening your arms. On paper, nothing cruel happened. In the room, I went from welcome to tolerated to a problem to solve. Rain became a wall, and I found myself on the wrong side of it, dry and oddly drowning. I started keeping a private ledger of my supposed trespasses, the way women of my generation keep recipes practical, precise. Written in pencil because the ingredients change. The navy coat with yellow buttons on clearance that made Emma glow. Like a street lamp in December returned to the universe within 24 hours. Because it isn't our style. The lentil soup left warm on a Tuesday with the ginger cookies wrapped in twine. Not a good time set at the threshold with my coat still on. The gentle question about bedtime when a tantrum echoed from a hallway. We don't need commentary. The text suggesting a hat on a windy day left on read. I typed it all with dates, not to win an argument, but to prove to myself I hadn't imagined the slide. If love could be mistaken for intrusion, then perhaps facts could keep me from apologizing for breathing. I never sent the list. I just looked at it when the word overbearing tried to put on my sweater. What gutted me wasn't the cold phrases, it was the escalation. A no-contact order, as if my arms were crime scenes, as if my knock were a siren. And reimbursement for financial entanglements, a phrase so clean it squeaked. They attached numbers to afternoons that smelled like cinnamon and diaper cream to nights when colic made time a circle. Unapproved involvement they called a furnace repair. I paid the hour the heat died in February, a preschool deposit when wait lists were winter-long, the down payment I offered when their faces crumpled with wanting a yard and fearing a bank. I sat at my kitchen table and tasted metal. There are things you give without receipts because they're not transactions. They're stitched into your name. To see them listed as line items to be untangled felt like being told to unkiss a forehead, undo a lullaby, unbake a birthday cake. You cannot. They wanted space written in law. They wanted money written back. They wanted a mother quieted into paperwork. So I pulled the filing box from under the microwave, the one that holds the life we pretend isn't math warranties. Insurance tax stubs, birthdays scribbled in margins. I laid out 15 years of transfers like photograph negatives on the table. Down payment $45,000, June 2017. Emma's Emergency Dental, $1,260, August 2018. Furnace, $8,300. Winter we named the wind. Summer camp checks 3 summers in a row, because she needs confidence, and she did, and I wanted to help her find it. Groceries that appeared when stomach flus cleaned cupboards. A hybrid car deposit, because the sedan is choking us, and I remembered the night my old Chevy coughed through 3 winters to get my son to school on time. I don't keep score, I keep people. Yet here I was tallying the invisible, not to throw in a courtroom, but to anchor myself against the revision that I'd forced my way into their lives with casseroles and a checkbook. I hadn't. I'd been invited until I wasn't. That night, sleep stayed across town. I lay on my side and replayed sentences I'd said softly enough to be mistaken for air. It's chilly, grab the thicker cardigan. She looks tired, maybe skip the birthday after 2 hours. He's rubbing his ear, watch for fever. I pressed the underside of words for sharp edges and found none, then wondered if kindness has edges now that only younger people can see. I walked rooms in the dark, straightening a picture frame, clicking a lamp off, counting the breaths between upstairs pipes settling and the refrigerator's small roar. I tried on other versions of me. The mother who never drops by, the grandmother who leaves gifts in Venmo memos, the woman who calls people by their first names the way doctors do. None of the costumes fit. Around 3, I stood at the window and watched a fox in the alley take exactly what it needed and vanish. I envied the fox its certainty. The first clue was a welcome mat that was not welcoming. Please remove shoes and respect our space in tidy block letters against a tasteful gray. I smiled like it was a joke the day I met it, shoes in hand, arms busy with salad and sunflowers. It wasn't a joke, it was a preamble I failed to translate. After that, the house-spoken signs labeled bins. Calendars color-coded to death, a whiteboard with routines printed like commandments. I used to think order was a kindness, it kept a life from fraying. Here, order was armor. I tried to be careful in a museum of someone else's rules. Stand here, speak quietly, admire without touching. We're trying to keep things clean, she'd say. Not unkind, not kind, just precise. I wish someone had written one more sentence on that mat. Respect our space also means leave love on the porch. I would have nodded. I would have learned to place warmth without stepping on the floor. The medicine cabinet told the story before anyone did. Vitamins, cough syrup, a thermometer, wandering under hair ties life. The way it happens when toddlers reset gravity. I bought little clear bins, labeled them with a printer I barely knew how to use, lined bottles like soldiers. It was silly and small and felt like help. The next week, everything was back, where chaos likes it. Reachable, real, a little sticky. No note, no thanks. Just the quiet undoing of my carefulness. I stood there with my label maker like a woman who'd stumbled into the wrong house in a dream. We prefer our own system came later, a sentence neat as a folded towel. I understood and didn't. Help is only help if the person receiving it doesn't feel inspected. I had crossed from helpful into helpfulness as judgment without seeing the border sign. It doesn't matter that my hands were clean. Intention doesn't shine under their lights. It matters that someone felt watched in their own mirror. He used to call on lunch breaks, breathless hungry, telling me about ridiculous clients and burnt coffee and the way his shoe squeaked on conference room floors. We'd laugh and I'd remind him to eat something green. Then the calls shrank into texts that sounded like memos. Busy call later grew long legs and ran to next week. Can't talk headed into a thing. I learned to translate, not now, not ever, not unless the house is on fire. When we spoke, his voice wore a tie, polite, faintly impatient. A man who loves you but has a meeting in 5. I told myself it was the season promotions toddlers, the paper-thin line between exhaustion and anger. But silence is a plant. Water it with routine, and it roots. I found myself narrating my day in my head, the way I used to into a receiver. Soup's on sale, Emma's letter S, looks like a swan. It's going to frost. The house answered with the refrigerator's small roar, and yet goodness remained stubborn as dandelions. There were afternoons when Emma barreled down the path and collided with my knees, all elbows, and Joy shouting secrets that were mostly about glitter and injustices at recess. There was the evening Ben fell asleep on my chest, heavy as bread, just out of the oven, his breath voting for my heartbeat, as the most boring and therefore most trustworthy sound in the room. We read the same book 3 times, and then the right way, which is to let him turn pages out of order, because toddlers understand narrative differently. I kept those moments in my pocket for days, when boundaries rang louder than grandma. I told myself love is a long game, and children keep scores. Adults can't see until later. I took pictures I never posted, not to prove I belonged, but to remember the exact slope of a cheek against my cardigan. The smudge of applesauce on a chin, the way Joy ignores calendars. The expectations talk arrived with folded hands and a tone I recognized from faculty meetings. We appreciate everything you do, but is the universal preface to subtraction. She had a list printed as if my presence could be itemized, and therefore managed text before visits, no surprise, gifts, no commentary on bedtime screen time, school choices. I nodded at each point like a student who wants to pass the class. Of course, I understand. I'll adjust. I even meant it in the moment, because love can bend. After she left, I stood at my sink, opened a drawer, and cried into a dish towel like it was 1989, and money had run out on a Wednesday. The house didn't change countertops, still clean. Basil still reaching for the window, but the temperature dropped. That night, I wrote their rules on an index card and stuck it to my fridge with a magnet shaped like a pear. I wasn't angry. I was newly terribly careful. The email arrived at 7:14 a.m., subject line quick request. The body was 4 sentences with no greeting and a thanks without my name. Please don't bring over food unless asked. It throws off our meal plan, and we're trying to be intentional about what we eat. I read it twice, then lifted the lid on the Dutch oven where chicken stock whispered on the stove and turned off the flame. Intentional. I set out 2 bowls anyway, because muscle memory is older than manners, then put them back, let the broth cool, strained it into jars for my own freezer. The kitchen, which is usually an echo chamber for kindness, felt professional, like I'd wandered into a restaurant where I didn't work. I wiped the counter as if I were cleaning up after a mistake. I wasn't angry. I was reassigned. I thought of all the hands my food had steadied, field trip mornings, flu nights, the week the heat went out, and realized there's a kind of hunger rules can't measure. The coat was navy, with sunflower yellow buttons, and a lining that made December kinder. I'd found it on end-of-season sale, stood in the aisle, and pictured Emma twirling under streetlights like a tiny lighthouse. When I brought it over, she spun in the doorway and said, "I'm a captain because she's the kind of girl who commands ships and tea parties." The next day, the coat vanished. Later I heard we donated it. It didn't fit our style. Our style. 2 words that swallow thank yous whole. I didn't argue. Style is a painting on a wall. Warmth is a hand at your back when the wind cuts through. Children know the difference. Emma asked where her captain coat went, and I lied sweetly because that's what we do when adults make choices. A child shouldn't have to metabolize. At home, I hung up my own scarf and felt suddenly overdressed for a life that no longer invited color. Thanksgiving came by in a text like a bus that doesn't stop. It's going to be just the 4 of us this year. We need quiet time. I browned a small chicken instead of a turkey and set one place with the good plate I usually save for company. I talked out loud over the radio to make the house believe it held more people. Christmas was a porch visit and a potted plant with a card that signed off Warmth, Thomas, and Andrea. Not love. Warmth, that careful, non-committal temperature no one can complain about. I wrapped 2 books for the children anyway and placed them in the trunk of my car as if opportunity might hitchhike. It didn't. The holidays were a room I pressed my face against from the outside, fogging the glass with the breath of a mother who knows traditions and not with a bang, but with an email sent from a phone at a stoplight. I opened the drawer with the rubber bands and cords that belong to old appliances and pulled out the folder that knows all my numbers. It felt indecent at first, entering tenderness into cells, turning memory into lines that ran neat as fence posts. Down payment, $45,000. Furnace, $8,300. Preschool deposit, $2,500. Summer camp, 3 checks, 3 summers, 3 versions of Emma Braver each August. The hybrid SUV deposit, which I justified by thinking of exhaust and little lungs. Grocery runs that never made receipts because kindness doesn't beep at a register. I typed quietly not to prepare exhibits, but to see the shape of the years when I still knew my part without asking. Spreadsheets don't love you back, but they don't lie either. When I finished, the total glowed at the bottom like something holy and wrong to look at. I closed the laptop and placed my palm on it, the way you do a Bible when you swear to tell the truth. It landed on me, sometime between the furnace entry and the camp total. This was never about money. Money is the easiest thing to rename. This is about being seen. Recognition is the currency mothers live on, paid not in checks, but in sentences like, "We couldn't have done it without you," or a head on your shoulder at 11 p.m. that says the same thing. When that stops, the world doesn't end. It just loses a color you can't mix again. I hadn't wanted to be their sponsor. I wanted to be their person. Gifts feel like control only to people who forgot where they came from. Nights of double shifts, thrifted winter coats, the math of rent over ramen. I didn't need reimbursement. I needed to not be erased. That's when I called Ruth, not for legal counsel, for the kind of truth that doesn't need a stamp to arrive. Ruth answered on the second ring voice, like an unlit match, rough ready. I told her about the email and the coat and the holidays and the list that felt like I'd put my heart in a calculator. She listened without offering pity, which is why she's the friend I trust. "They've declared the fight," she said finally. "You decide if you're going to show up or sit this one out." "I don't want to fight my own," I said. "You don't," she agreed, "but you also don't disappear. There's a third option: you show up without the heat. You show up with facts and a spine." She asked if I'd eaten. I had. "Good. Print your spreadsheet. Put it away. You may never need it. But hold it like armor under your sweater." I went home lighter, not because anything had changed, but because someone I respect still recognized my outline. Emma's note arrived like a bird that forgot it wasn't supposed to land. Lined paper torn edge pencil smudges where feelings rubbed too hard. I miss you. Please don't be sad. She said she liked the muffins, which is code for I remember who you are. She didn't mention lawsuits or boundaries, or the kind of adult words that stick to teeth. Children name weather, not climate. I pressed the paper to my chest and felt something shift back into alignment small but real, like a bone setting. I didn't write her back right away. I went to the kitchen, put blueberries in a bowl, and ate them slow so sweetness took its time. Then I answered on the same kind of paper. I told her sadness is not a storm that lasts forever, and that missing someone is a way of loving them, out loud when you're not allowed to speak. I signed it with a heart she could keep under her pillow. It was a Tuesday, which used to mean soup simmering, and the door left cracked because I always assumed I was welcome. I lifted the bag and the heat pressed into my palms like a living thing. It's not a good time, she said, before the smell had finished introducing itself. We've talked about this. You come by too much. Too much is a measure that changes depending on who's holding the cup. I stood in the doorway with the weight of lentils and ginger and the week's mercy in my hands and felt the house close itself a quarter inch. My son looked into his coffee, the way men do when they want to be somewhere else, and also want to be blameless for not being here. I nodded the old teacher in me, choosing not to escalate a room that didn't want to learn. I set the bag down on the porch anyway, rang the bell, and walked away one more warm thing they didn't have to accept. The family thread in my phone used to be a table potlucks of photos, and what time, and I'll bring the salad. One afternoon, it became updates only changed without warning, as if they'd hung a new sign over a restaurant I'd eaten in for years. After that, messages arrived like memos, soccer times, travel dates, needs, no reply, information that politely vacuumed my voice out of the room. I typed, looks great once, and erased it before sending because praise felt like a guest commenting on the paint. The rename did its work. I learned how to scroll without contribution, how to witness without belonging. When people say boundaries, they picture fences with gates. This felt more like soundproofing. I could see mouths moving, but the words didn't travel. I didn't leave the chat. I'm old enough to know that absence also speaks. I stayed present like furniture in the corner, a chair no one sits in, but everyone would notice if it disappeared. I heard about the recital from a neighbor whose daughter takes lessons in the same building. She pointed to Emma's name on the flyer with a smile I matched in public and saved for later in private. I went early, sat in the back near the exit, and watched the procession of small humans doing big, brave things with their hands. When Emma climbed onto the bench, she scanned the room for faces she is allowed to expect. I kept my gaze on the program and listened harder. Claire de Lune wandered a little, stopped to tie a shoe, then remembered where it was going and found the moon again. I stood before the applause, had hands, and left, not because I was ashamed, but because leaving was the only way to keep the moment hers, not mine. In the car, I let myself cry exactly 40 seconds, then drove home and put the program in a drawer where I keep proof that love can be silent and true at the same time. 2 days later, the email arrived with subject line concerns. It began without Mom ended with Bess Thomas. The shape of warmth without the heat. He repeated phrases I recognized from podcasts and therapists' blogs, respecting space complicating dynamics building independence. He wrote like he was CCing HR. I read it at the kitchen table where I'd taught him to sign his name in cursive loops and tails dignified as old letters. He had mastered a new penmanship, clean, careful, deniable. I wanted to reply with a picture of him, feverish at 6, with my hand on his forehead, of a red bike that cost me a week's rest of the first apartment he couldn't afford alone. Instead, I closed the laptop and watered my basil. I have learned the difference between a conversation and a deposition. The latter records, it doesn't repair. I would rather talk when we both sound like people again. That night, the spreadsheet called me back, like a lighthouse I didn't want to admit I needed. I added the small things I'd skipped because they didn't have invoices 3 a.m. Phone consults about rashes and rumbles in little tummies. Standing in line at the DMV, so they didn't have to bring a toddler to purgatory. The morning I took the dog to the emergency vet when the kids were sick and sleep had dissolved. I added the recital flyer and didn't put a number beside it. I wrote Navy coat with no $sign. I typed muffins and then deleted it because even Excel knows some cells shouldn't be filled. The total at the bottom meant nothing and everything. I printed it once, folded it into thirds, and slid it under a stack of cookbooks, not to present to a judge, not to weaponize, but to remind myself I didn't imagine a lifetime. I lived it, and even if the ledger never gets read, I have. The receptionist asked for the nature of the issue, like I might say leaky roof or fender bender. I said my son is suing me, and heard the headset go still. She transferred me so fast I imagined the handset jerking its cord. The attorney's voice. Miss Harper was firm, clean, the sound of someone who alphabetizes justice. Come in Tuesday, she said, no sugar. After I hung up, I sat with the phone turned face down, a superstition I invented on the spot. Saying it out loud had weight, not a misunderstanding, not a family tangle court. I brewed tea I didn't drink and wrote 3 lines on a notepad. Tell the truth, bring nothing sharp, wear the locket. I told myself I wasn't going to war. I was walking into a room where paper pretends to be stories. Still, I put a copy of the spreadsheet under a cookbook and rehearsed inhaling without shaking. When you become a case, vocabulary changes, but your hands still know how to butter toast. I made toast, I ate it, I called no one. He came by 3 days later, hands in his pockets, like a teenager trying on regret. We stood in my driveway because he wouldn't step past the threshold as if the house were contagious. This doesn't have to be a big thing, he began, voice reasonable, in the way a man's voice gets when he's moving you toward a cliff while narrating safety. It's not personal, he added, and I laughed, a dry, surprised thing that tasted like old coffee. Not personal. Taking your mother to court is the opposite of an invoice. He talked about clarity and structure and how litigation creates containers. I watched his mouth deliver words that didn't belong to him and wondered when he'd learned to outsource his language. The sun hit his shoulder and made a small, disloyal halo. You're angry, he said, mistaking weather for climate. I'm awake, I answered. He shifted, looked toward his car, then back at me, like a man measuring the gap between 2 roofs. We can settle, he said. Name what you want. I want the truth spoken plainly, I said, and felt my posture right itself. Say you don't need a mother anymore, not like this, not nearby, not in your texts or on your porch. Say it out loud so we don't have to hide behind forms. He flinched because honesty doesn't have a mute button. That's not fair, he tried. It's boundaries. Boundaries are fences you point to in daylight, I replied. This is eviction by paperwork. He rubbed his jaw like the word stung. We're building our own family, he said, a phrase that always cuts someone out while pretending to frame a picture. Good, I said. Build it, but don't salt the ground that raised you, and then tell the soil it's being dramatic. He looked at his shoes. The quiet between us was thick, freighted with everything we weren't going to fix in a driveway. Say it, I repeated. Not cruel, just tired. You don't want me in it. He didn't. He said nothing, which is how cowards tell the truth. I took a breath, opened the door inside my mouth where the last dignity lives. About the money, I said. He looked up, too quickly relieved to be on terrain he recognizes. We can reimburse, stop. I said, soft and surgical. 1 cent is not coming back. Not because I'm greedy. Because it was never a loan, it was love. I won't turn lullabies into ledger entries so you can feel clean. He started to argue the way a man argues with a mirror when he hates what the light reveals. I shook my head. I won't let you rename gifts as entanglements to justify distance. Keep your accounts, I'll keep my integrity. The wind lifted a leaf between us and dropped it like a verdict. You think you're winning something here, I added, but you're trading a mother for a cleaner inbox. He opened his mouth, then closed it, the sentence collapsing under its own paperwork. We're done for today, I said, and for once I didn't fill the silence he left. I didn't chase him down the path with a parting speech, or an extra container of soup. I didn't apologize for the octaves of my care. I didn't beg entry to a house that had measured my footsteps and found them excessive. I went inside and shut the door with the gentleness I reserve for sleeping children and fragile seasons. There's a particular holiness in not performing your pain. I washed a single mug dried, placed it back on its hook, facing forward small order in a world failing its larger one. In the front room, the afternoon light made lace on the carpet through the fern leaves, and I stood in it until my breathing remembered its rhythm. Dignity can look like inaction from the street. From the inside, it's an athlete's stillness. Loaded, deliberate, refusing to flinch. I didn't press my ear to the door. I didn't watch him reverse. I sat at the table I bought when he was 5 and practiced what I'd say in court if asked to pick between fury and fact. I chose fact. Miss Harper's office smelled faintly of toner and peppermint. She greeted me without pity, blessed relief, and slid a legal pad across the desk. "We're not here to scorch," she said. "We're here to clarify." The strategy was a backbone. I could stand my age on no countersuit, no character, knife work, no grand theater. We present context, not excuses. We show a pattern of care, not control. We concede reasonable boundaries and reject erasure. We bring receipts only as light, not as weapons. She asked for a timeline, and I gave her one that started long before emails, nights of 3 jobs, mornings of paper. Crowns the day I sold my house to be 5 minutes closer to a door that now locks politely. She didn't write everything. Good lawyers know which truths carry and which burden the cart. They will make you a caricature, she warned, so arrive full and human. Judges are good at recognizing cartoons. I left with marching orders that felt like a prayer: stay small, stay sharp, stay kind. At home, I tried on the labels in my bathroom mirror like thrift store blouses. Overbearing, invasive, meddlesome, that's the word they'll mean, though someone will type mealsome and smirk. I said them aloud and watched my face refuse to belong to them. Overbearing is a hand that shoves. Mine lifted fevers and fielded nightmares. Invasive is a root cracking foundations. I replanted myself 5 minutes away and kept to the sidewalk unless summoned. Meddlesome is a finger in every pie. I've been the oven. Miss Harper said to expect the worst version of me to show up in their mouths, the woman who weaponizes cookies, who can't let go, who needs to be needed. I wrote those on an index card, and beside each added the truer sentence. Need isn't a sin, it's a bridge. Letting go isn't abandonment, it's respect with grief inside. Cookies are not weapons, they're treaties between generations. I put the card in my purse. If I must be translated, I will supply the glossary. Ruth says families forget who poured the concrete while they argue about paint colors. She's right. We raise children to stand on ground. We leveled, then watch them rename it independence and call our footprints messy. I am not angry about that. Success means they don't feel the slope we fought, but pretending the foundation poured itself. That's indecent. In Harper's office, I nodded when she said, "We won't sermonize." In my chest, I delivered the sermon anyway that a woman who patched jeans and stretched rent and passed up new boots to fund biology camp should not have to explain in a courtroom that care is not coercion. I won't preach that from the stand. Judges don't like church. But I will carry the knowledge like a warm stone in my pocket, something to hold when the words' pattern of intrusion get floated as if my face fits. If they forget the ground, I will stand on it and let it speak for me. Concrete has a memory. That night, I pulled down the old shoebox where I keep paper that refuses to be thrown away. A crayon card from a boy with a gap-toothed grin. To the best mom in the world, edges soft from being thumbed. A note from Andrea in her early years. Thank you, Mom. I don't know how we'd manage without you. Written in swooping cursive before fonts replaced feelings. Preschool scribbles, dried leaves from a fall walk. I took with Emma a ribbon from a birthday cake that leaned to the left and tasted like victory anyway. I didn't gather them for evidence. I gathered them for oxygen. You can walk into a courthouse with documents and still need proof you matter. I put the box back and took one thing with me, a photo of my son at 6 frosting on his chin. Crown on his head, looking at me like I invented birthdays. I slid it into my locket behind the older picture. Armor doesn't have to shine. Sometimes it's oval and closes with a click. Ruth called around 9 with the kind of comfort that refuses to coddle. They will underestimate you, she said. They will say you're sentimental, soft past your prime. Walk in like a granite countertop. I don't want to be hard, I said. Hard isn't the goal, she replied. Solid is. Let them throw words. You won't chip. I told her about the driveway, the not personal, the spreadsheet folded under cookbooks. She grunted approval at the last part. Bring it if you must, she said. But remember, your real evidence is breathing and ordinary. The judge is a woman. She will recognize a mother even if counsel can't pronounce the word. Before we hung up, she added, eat breakfast the day of. People think truth speaks for itself. It needs blood sugar. I laughed an actual laugh, unbitter, and promised to scramble eggs. Good, she said. Go to sleep now. Tomorrow be a mountain, in comfortable shoes. Emma's second note was smaller, like she'd torn it from the back of a school worksheet, so no one would notice. I found it tucked into the slats of my porch bench under the geranium. I heard them talking. I don't like it. I miss you. Children don't bother with prefaces when their hearts are loud. She had underlined miss twice the pencil, pressing so hard, it dented the wood beneath. I didn't try to untangle what she'd overheard or apologize for feelings that don't belong in small arms. I sat on the step and let her words land, where the summons had same porch, different weather. The court would decide the legal shape of our distance. Emma had already decided the emotional geography. Distance is real, so is a thread. I moved the geranium an inch to give the note more shade, as if paper could wilt, and left a lemon drop in its place, a secret treaty between a girl and a woman who haven't forgotten how to pass sweetness hand to hand without being seen. I wrote back on the only paper that matched the size of her courage, lined, torn, folded small. I told her she is not a messenger for storms, that adults start and can't quiet. I told her grown-ups say things when they're scared, that make rooms colder than they meant, and that fear belongs to them, not to her. You're not a problem, I wrote. You're a person I love. I reminded her of the trick we made up years ago for sending feelings across town. Look at the moon at 8 o'clock and know I'm looking, too. We don't have to be in the same room to be on the same side, I wrote. I didn't mention court or rules or the way my name looks in bold on a summons. I signed it with a heart and a lemon drop doodle, so she'd know it was mine, even if someone else's hands opened it. Then I tucked it under the geranium where her note had been and made tea I finally drank. Her call came as a whisper, wrapped in static. Grandma, I stepped into the hallway, shut the bedroom door with the soft click of a secret. I used Mom's phone. She's in the shower. Are you mad at Dad? I leaned against the wall where I once measured Thomas's growth in pencil lines. I'm hurt, baby, I said, not mad. Silence, then a small sniffle the phone couldn't hide. What's the difference? Hurt says this mattered. Anger says you don't. I won't say that about your daddy. She breathed steadier. Will you come to my next recital? I wanted to say yes with both hands. I don't know, I told her, because truth is a kind of respect. Some doors are locked right now. I want you there, she said, brave and plain. I know, I answered. Point at the moon at 8. I'll point back. Water started somewhere on her end, a timer we didn't set. I love you. I love you more. When the line died, I stood a moment longer, letting the ache name itself correctly. Court morning, I dressed like I was going to church, and to work at the same time, navy dress, soft cardigan, comfortable shoes a mountain could stand in. Before I left, I opened the locket, the little oval Thomas gave me at 60, and slid a second photo behind the old one, him at 6, with frosting on his chin. Crown crooked eyes greedy for joy. Armor doesn't always shine. Sometimes it clicks shut under your collarbone and reminds your pulse who it's beating for. I packed tissues not for tears, but for dignity, and a lemon drop for courage, Because sugar steadies the voice. Miss Harper met me on the courthouse steps, legal pad tucked like a hymn book. Steady and small, she said her benediction. The hallway smelled like cleaner and old wood. People studied the floor as if it would testify. I touched the locket once, a ritual, then walked into a room where life becomes lines and waited for my name to be pronounced like a problem. And then, God willing, like a person. His attorney rose with a voice perfectly engineered to offend no one. He never used the word mother. He said the defendant as if I'd broken into a museum and rearranged the statues. He spoke of emotional boundary violations, uninvited presence patterns of intrusive support words so antiseptic you could perform surgery with them. He listed instances, the coat, the soup, the recital, like I'd brought a trumpet instead of my 2 hands. He never said the years I worked 3 jobs, so a boy could eat without watching me count. He never said February's furnace or July's fevers, or the night I slept upright in a hospital chair. He read from paper because paper doesn't look back. Thomas stared at the table the way men do when they're not sure if the ground under their story will hold. Andrea crossed her legs like we were at brunch. I sat still and breathed on purpose, letting the locket anchor me to the fact that truth has a face, not just a file. Then Miss Harper stood, hands folded, voice like clean linen. "Your Honor, we're not here to contest their right to peace," she began. "We're here to provide context, the kind that doesn't fit in bullet points without becoming a lie." She offered the judge a thin packet, timelines, receipts, a few photographs, light, not weapons. "We acknowledge boundaries," she said. "We reject erasure." She didn't varnish me. She didn't nominate me for sainthood. She said I lived 5 minutes away because the family asked for help until they didn't, and that my presence, while imperfect, wasn't harm. It was history. "This case asks the court to turn devotion into disturbance," she concluded, "and the law is not a translator for discomfort." The judge's face didn't blink, but her pen stopped moving. Miss Harper sat, touched my sleeve like a metronome ticking back to calm. In the row behind us, someone coughed the way people cough when they're remembering their own mothers. I stared at the wood grain of the rail and counted 4 knots. 4 is steady. When it was my turn, my knees complained but held. I faced the judge, not the people who had already edited me. My voice surprised me by arriving low, even mine. "Presence isn't violence," I said. "Showing up isn't a crime. Loving too much is not the same as trying to control." I kept my palms open on the table where everyone could see them. I raised a son. I gave him what I had in time and money without asking for a receipt. They want more space. They can have it, but they can't ask you to make me a threat to get it. I let the quiet sit. If my soup was unwelcome, I can stop cooking. If my visits were too often, I can wait for invitations. But please don't let paperwork rename care as coercion. I didn't cry. Billie Holiday would have been proud. The judge nodded once, just a breath of movement. I sat down and slid my fingers over the locket, feeling the tiny hinge that has never failed. I used the worst word I know for what was happening, erasure. "This isn't a boundary dispute." I said softly, "It's a request to erase a grandmother from a life by making her a legal problem." The judge's eyes were careful. "The law can't cure family," I added, "but it shouldn't help rewrite it." Miss Harper didn't touch my arm. This time she let the sentence stay upright. Across the aisle, their attorney shuffled papers, as if order could tidy what the word had just knocked loose. I wasn't accusing them of monsters. Monsters are easier to hate than people you raised. I was naming the small, efficient way love gets turned down, like a bed you're not invited to sleep in. The court officer's radio crackled and then quieted. Someone behind me sniffed. I kept my eyes forward because looking at them would have made me beg, and I promised myself I would not beg for a place I'd already earned. For a second, I did look at my boy, not their lawyer. His eyes were glass, not ice, and glass can crack. He met me and looked away, and met me again like a man learning a language he grew up speaking. Shame is a poor translator, but it still moves the mouth. I watched the little tells, the jaw muscle that leaped when I said erase the finger that tapped twice, when I said lullabies don't have receipts. He didn't stand, didn't speak. He let counsel keep him safe from the sound of his own mother. But something wobbled. It wasn't victory. I don't believe in winning at family. It was attention. For the first time since this began, he was listening all the way to the end of my sentences. That is a larger miracle than any gavel. I pressed my thumb to the locket and pretended I was steady for the both of us. Behind his quiet, a boy with frosting on his chin blinked. Waiting is a room with no furniture. Court adjourned and we filed out, each carrying a different version of the day. The hallway smelled like coffee. Someone forgot, and old arguments. Miss Harper said, "We'll get it in writing," which is law for don't guess. We stood by the elevator as strangers practiced not meeting anyone's eye. When the doors opened, I didn't step in. I wanted stairs needed to feel each floor pass under my feet. Outside, the air was ordinary, the most merciful thing. I didn't cry on the steps. I didn't scan the parking lot for their faces. I walked 1 block, bought a newspaper I didn't intend to read, and sat on a bench where pigeons argued territory. There is a particular blankness after a storm, a pause where the world is itself again, but quieter. I let that blankness sit beside me like a friend who doesn't need to talk. When I finally stood, I was tired in the honest way, not the hopeless one. The envelope came 2 days later, cream with the court's neat seal, businesslike, as a nurse. I carried it to the porch and opened it with a butter knife. Because cheap drama doesn't suit me, the words were brief and exact. Petition denied. Insufficient evidence to meet the legal threshold for harassment. Intrusion or undue emotional harm. The court acknowledges the complexity of family dynamics and encourages communication outside litigation. No triumph in the language, no scolding either, just a clean refusal to turn devotion into a misdemeanor. I read it twice, then placed it on the table like a holy thing, and exhaled in a tone I hadn't heard in months. Miss Harper called, said it's the right read, and I thanked her with the kind of gratitude that doesn't gush. When we hung up, I touched the locket, smiled at the boy inside, and said to the empty room, "They tried to make me a hazard. The law said I'm human. No confetti fell, no violins swelled. Dignity is quieter than victory," and I felt it return like a coat you forgot at a party and thought was gone. I didn't text the group thread a scan or a told you so. I didn't rehearse a speech at a mirror. I wrote one word on a post-it dignity and stuck it inside the cabinet where I keep tea, a place I visit every morning. I poured hot water over a bag, added honey, and raised the mug to my own mouth like a toast. Then I swept the kitchen in slow lines, not because it needed it, but because order is a lullaby I sing to myself. I took the denial, folded it in thirds, slipped it behind the photo of my husband in the hallway frame, not to hide it, but to put it where the quiet victories live. When you fight to keep your name your own, the prize is simple. You get to answer to it again without apologizing. That afternoon, I baked banana bread, ripe bananas bruised into sugar butter, soft as forgiveness walnuts, chopped like punctuation. Billie Holiday played on the radio, that soft ache that never asks you to hurry your sorrow. The house inhaled the warm smell, and for the first time in too long, exhaled something lighter than grief. I washed bowls while the loaf rose, wiped the counter in slow circles, and listened to the radiator's small reassuring clicks. When the bread came out, I cut a slice too soon, let butter melt into the future, and ate standing at the sink, the way exhausted women have always celebrated private saints' days. I didn't think about court or emails or the navy coat that went to a stranger. I thought about how 2 hands and a warm oven can argue successfully with emptiness. I wrapped half the loaf for Ruth, left it on her porch with a note, not victory, just breath. She texted a heart. I texted a lemon drop. They didn't call. Not that day, not the next. I saw the mailman slide a cream envelope into their box, 2 houses down, and watched the afternoon not change. Silence has a talent for theatrics. It stretches itself across the room and dares you to name it. People think shouting is the worst thing. It isn't. Yelling tells you where to put your hands. Silence makes you spend a whole night wondering if you imagined an entire life. I didn't. The basil still leaned toward light. My cup still warmed my fingers. Emma's notes still lived under the geranium. I went for a walk at sunrise and watched the stubborn hedge flowers perform their tiny defiance. On the way back, I paused at the sidewalk, looked toward their windows, and kept walking. I don't punish. I don't beg. I make banana bread and answer the phone when a girl whispers, "Are you mad?" and tell her the truth. I'm hurt. I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere I didn't choose. The path behind my townhouse has a way of telling the truth. Hedges clipped within an inch of their patience, chain link tired of pretending to be a view. And then wildflowers, nobody planted, purple, stubborn, small as a coin. They bloom without permission, which feels like advice. I walk there before the neighborhood remembers its manners. Sneakers whispering stones into the gutter breath, measured like prayer. Trash day, a lid claps. A dog argues with a squirrel. Somewhere a screen door makes the sound of leaving and surviving. I touch the rough post where kids have carved their initials and think about all the names that grow without water. The court didn't fix anything. Weeds do. They show up, make color, accept the boot, and return anyway. I practice their theology. Take light where it lands. Push roots where the soil loosens. Do not apologize for existing. When the sun slides around the garages, I turn home pockets empty. Except for a dandelion head, I'll forget to wish on until it's already granted something I didn't think to ask. She was waiting by the mailbox like a spy who hasn't learned to pretend she isn't one. Book in her hands, backpack, crooked hair, escaping the style her mother prefers. "Hi, Grandma Emma," said soft urgent. We looked left right then at each other, which is the only surveillance that counts. "I'm not supposed to talk to you," she whispered. And then, "I don't think you're bad." My throat did the old ache. "Thank you," I said, because children's verdicts are the last honest court. She shifted the book so I could see the cover, and I laughed without noise. Anne of Green Gables, a girl who also gets in trouble for loving too loudly. "I brought it to return," she said, "but maybe you should borrow it back." I took the paperback the way you'd take a hand extended across a river. "I'll take good care," I promised. She nodded serious. A car door slammed somewhere that mattered. "Go," I said. She went. Not running, just walking fast. I held the book to my chest like contraband joy and didn't move until the street forgot us. At home, I opened the book and found our old conversations pressed between chapters' pages, dog-eared at courage, a crumb from a picnic we'd had on the living room floor, a faint smear of grape jelly that made the ink shine. I slipped a letter where the ribbon once lived. "My darling girl," I wrote, in a hand that has written lunch notes and sympathy cards and rent checks. Love doesn't always have a front door. Sometimes it's a back path and a paperback. Sometimes it's a secret library card no one else needs to see. If you ever think you're too much. Remember Anne and the way her heart troubles the neat people into color. I drew a tiny moon in the corner, our 8 o'clock beacon, and tucked a pressed clover between chapters 16 and 17. Luck disguised as botany. At dawn, I walked the quiet like a cat and left the book on her porch spine toward the street, so it looked like a neighbor had just set down a story for whoever needed it most. The community center smelled like crayons and lemon cleaner and the fatigue of women who keep their promises. I signed in as a volunteer and took a seat in the corner with a stack of picture books that know how to hold a room. A boy with shoelaces like spaghetti asked, "Are you anybody's grandma?" I could have said yes and named a girl who leaves notes under geraniums. I could have said no and told the truth a different way. "I used to be," I said, smiling, and I still know how. He climbed into my lap like I'd passed a test. We read about a caterpillar that eats its way into a brighter math, and then another about a girl who keeps a map of kindness under her pillow. After snack, a tired mother mouthed thank you from the doorway, and I lifted my hand palm up. "You're welcome, you're seen, You're not alone. On my way out, a staffer asked if I could come Thursdays too. I said yes. The building exhaled. Book club on Tuesdays became a room of soft-voiced experts at survival. Widows who can fix a faucet and a face. Divorced women who can parallel park their way out of grief. Grandmothers rewrote it into anonymity by daughters-in-law who say boundaries like scripture. We didn't trade horror stories like charms. We passed sentences that fit. Useful when needed, quiet. Otherwise, Lorraine said stirring tea the way a woman stirs outrage until it dissolves. Heads nodded like prairie grass. They love that we appear with casseroles, someone added, and disappear with our feelings. We laughed not because it was funny, but because lungs require it. I didn't mention court. I didn't have to. The way they sat told me we were all carrying the same invisible furniture. We recommended novels where older women are protagonists instead of warnings. We scheduled a matinee because the prices were kinder, and so were we. Leaving, I caught my reflection in the door glass and saw a version of myself I hadn't met in months, standing upright without needing an apology. The note appeared under the park bench where Emma and I sometimes fed crumbs to brave birds. Folded small taped to the underside like a secret, with instructions. Do you still have the flower necklace? The one you said was magic. My fingers knew the answer before my mouth did. I walked home with my palm closed around the question, like a warm coin, the kind you don't spend unless it's for the right thing. Upstairs, the jewelry box sighed old air. There it was, the small silver pendant, shaped like a daisy, petals. A little scuffed by years of chests and prayers. I remembered telling a girl with skinned knees that sometimes magic is just a word for the love that stays when plans don't. I placed the necklace on a square of tissue, added a lemon drop because rituals matter, and wrote a note that rhymed with truth more than with poetry. The bench would keep our appointment. So would I. Before dawn, I slid a tiny box under our bench, the daisy necklace, and a matchbook note that said, "Magic is love that outlasts grown-ups' expectations." I tied it in place with a strip from an old handkerchief and sat a minute listening to the city yawn itself awake. By afternoon, a single red thread appeared on my porch in the smallest bow. No words, none needed. She had found it, and we were speaking the language we invented for hard seasons. Then came his letter. My son's handwriting still leaning left, like it always has, 3 pages steady and plain. He said sorry in 3 directions for the lawsuit, for the silence, for letting language that wasn't mine speak for him. He didn't barter for forgiveness, he asked to be heard. I put my hand over thank you for raising me and felt a hinge finally catch. After that, Andrea wrote, "No steel this time, just a careful cup set on my counter. We won't pursue more action. Maybe we can try again with less noise." I let it breathe like bread, then answered yes to a small beginning. If we start with honesty, we met at the park because neutrality has benches. We didn't hug. We let swings squeak and kids narrate their victories. She admitted fear of not being enough of comparison. I admitted mine of being erased. We traded small workable terms texts that are real questions, invitations that mean themselves, answers that don't need footnotes. When we stood, the air hadn't warmed, but the ice knew which season was coming. It wasn't a reunion. It was something quieter and braver, a measured thaw. I didn't win loudly. I outlasted the weather. The court said no. Not to me, but to the idea that devotion could be litigated, and that small word returned my name to me. My granddaughter said I miss you, and that thread tossed across a hedge and a hard season held when everything else slipped. My son said I'm sorry late, but clear and apology. I've learned is not an eraser, it is a door. I chose patience over spectacle, dignity over performance, and then I simply kept showing up in quiet places at the stove, on the porch, under the moon, at 8. That is how a life heals, not with a verdict alone, but with steady hands, refusing to throw anything breakable. If you need a moral take, mine don't shout what time and truth will pronounce for you. Keep records, keep breathing, Keep your kindness from turning bitter. I am older now and lighter. The law declined to erase me. The child remembered me. The boy I raised became a man again.